News. The man accused of hitting and killing a Hamilton County deputy with his car yesterday is now being held without bond.
Rodney Hinton Jr. made his first court appearance just about an hour ago.
So this is one of those stories that really pisses me off, and I know you guys out there in the audience are going to be angered by it too, because it's not just the senseless nature of the crime, because the suspect in this particular case is accused of running over a sheriff's deputy in the state of Ohio. It's also the motivation behind it, because apparently this guy was angry that a different police officer in a different police department supposedly shot his son to death unjustifiably, even though the facts do not support that account of events. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go over both cases so you guys can understand what was going on. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
Tiffany, a very challenging morning in the courtroom. Rodney Hinton Jr. appearing to show no remorse for that alleged attack. As he was being escorted out of the courtroom, he appeared to shout at deputies he's going to be gone forever, though it's unclear if he's referring to the deputy that he's accused of killing or his son, who was killed by a Cincinnati police officer on Thursday.
So we're going to start off with the story of Ryan Hinton, who is the 18-year-old that was killed by the police one day prior to the events that we're going to talk about with his father, Rodney Hinton Jr.
Another news tonight, Cincinnati police are sharing body camera video of the moments that led to an officer-involved shooting and killing of a suspect in East Price Hill.
Hi there, Mike. This video is very fast. We're talking about 6 seconds. 6 seconds from the time that officer got out of his vehicle and fired those shots. I do want to warn you, what you're about to watch could be hard to see.
And I just want to point out a couple of things. First and foremost, for long-term viewers of this channel, this is in fact Daniel Dindak, somebody that we've talked about on this channel before, that some of you got angry because I pointed out is attractive, giving us this particular story. So it's nice to see her again, although based on the circumstances, I just want to say I'm not really on board with the take of, oh, it was just 6 seconds, it was just 6 seconds, when in reality, the suspect in this particular case was among a group of suspects that were being chased by multiple officers. The altercation lasted a little bit longer than that. It just so happens that the officer who ended up pulling the trigger ended up approaching the scene late when he spotted the armed suspect and fired the shots that ultimately ended up killing him. But we're getting ahead of ourselves because the body cam footage was released, and quite promptly, might I add. So let's review what we can see from here, although I do want to make something clear right off the top. It's not actually going to be all that clear.
He's got a gun on your right,
In a matter of seconds.
So yeah, that version of the body cam footage, let's be clear, doesn't tell us anything. Now, we do have multiple officers at the scene. There should be multiple different angles of the body cam, but all you could really see is an officer running with a gun in hand. You have other officers shouting out that the suspect in this particular case, which is Ryan Hinton, the 18-year-old who ultimately ended up getting killed, did have a firearm on him at the time. And by the way, subsequent reports and possibly later on body cam footage after he was shot and killed would likely indicate that the gun was in fact in his hand with an extended magazine. But of course, we need to pull back even further so you can understand why the police were there in the first place, because this all revolves around a stolen car situation.
It all began with a stolen vehicle, a Kia from Edgewood, Kentucky. GPS tracking led the investigation here, a condo complex in East Price Hill. Officers arrived, and Chief Terry Thigi explains what happened next.
All 4 individuals get out and start running.
on your right.
Some in different directions. So officers decide which individual they're going to pursue. One officer decides to pursue the individual who we now know had a firearm in his hand.
At some point, the person with the gun slips.
They heard the metal from the firearm hit the concrete. This individual gets up, still has the firearm in his hand, and continues to run through the dumpsters.
Now again, those edits actually do come from the local news affiliate. I did not make those edits, so obviously it makes the situation much more unclear when they end up pausing it like that, and I can't review the footage and tell you what I see for myself, but you can actually see pretty clearly in the earlier portion of the video that Ryan Hinton, the person who is now identified as the one who was shot and killed in this particular instance, was fleeing with 4 individuals from a stolen vehicle. He had a firearm on him. The reason the police were there was was due to the fact that they were able to track this stolen Kia to this apartment complex or condo complex as it's described in the local news report, and then he ends up running through a dumpster that obscures him. You have an officer coming around in order to cut him off, and he has the gun in hand at the time that the officer ultimately ends up firing those shots. Now, there are reports from the officer that he felt like the gun was pointed at him. There's descriptions of it being in a bladed position. All of that can be determined with a further additional investigation, but right now it seems like we know that this guy had a firearm on him with an extended magazine. He was fleeing a stolen car, and this is ultimately what ended up leading to his death. So as of right now, with the information we have available to us, this appears to be a justified shooting, and honestly, this is kind of the most obvious instance of play stupid games, win stupid prizes, because when he fell to the ground, he could have surrendered. He could have left the gun on the ground because he in fact dropped it. It actually hit the pavement, but instead he decided to pick it up as he was fleeing from the police, and this is obviously indicative of the potential of a deadly threat. You have the firearm on hand, you have him running through a dumpster that obscures him, and if you're the police, like the police chief ultimately ends up saying, you don't have to wait for him to actually fire the shots off at you in order for you to defend yourself, and I think it is reasonable in these circumstances for you to be ready to use lethal force and in fact deploy lethal force, especially if what was said happens to be true, which is the gun was pointed at the officer. Now, of course, there's a bunch of different conspiracy nut jobs on the internet.com claiming that he already dropped the gun and all this other nonsense that doesn't appear to be verified. Again, if we get the full body cam footage, we should be able to see if the gun was near him or dropped behind the dumpster, but we don't actually hear the second sound of the gun hitting the pavement, which we are able to pick up clearly when he slips and falls. So I don't believe that that was the case. I do believe he had the gun in his hand, bare minimum. Whether it was pointed or about to be ready to the position where it was pointed, that is neither here nor there. The fact is, this makes him a potential deadly threat, and a deadly force response from the police seems ultimately reasonable.
The officer who fired the shots was chasing another suspect before he made contact with the armed suspect.
The officer who did discharge his firearm said that when the individual came out between the dumpsters, he had the firearm in front of him. It was in like a bladed position, and it was pointed at the officer. And he felt threatened for his life, and that's why he discharged his firearm.
4 to 5 rounds were fired. The suspect was hit twice, given medical care right away, and died. Fiji says this is the gun the suspect had. A semi-automatic with an extended magazine with another magazine in his pocket.
Let me be very direct. We cannot allow individuals to flee from officers with a loaded firearm aimed at them. When this happens, the outcome is almost always tragic.
So I actually looked up what bladed position means, and essentially what is being described right here is, let's say the gun is on your right side, the left side or the left shoulder was what was actually exposed, and then there's something with the position of the feet, and he said that he believed that the gun could easily be pointed at him or was pointed at him, according to the chief of the Cincinnati police. And again, this is where we're at in terms of this case. Now, you can try to make a federal case out of it, you can try to get a prosecutor to pursue charges against this particular officer, but in my opinion, a jury looking at this would very likely side with the police officer in this particular case, because stolen car, multiple perpetrators, one that is clearly and obviously armed, has the gun on him, ends up being shot because he came from a concealed position, and the officer has to make a split-second decision.
Police also told us that a stolen gun was found inside that stolen Kia. At this time, we still do not have the identity of the person who was shot and killed. All police could tell us is that he was approximately 18 years old.
Again, Ryan Hinton should have not ran in this situation. Ryan Hinton was in fact the author of his own peril through his multiple criminal actions, and this is where the case should have been left. But of course, it's not where it was left, because his father, Rodney Hinton Jr., decided it would be appropriate not to target the officer behind the shooting, not to target the officers from this particular police department, but to target a sheriff's deputy, an elderly sheriff sheriff's deputy, who, by the way, was either past retirement and doing some volunteer work or on the cusp of retirement, and plowed into him with his car in what is being described as a premeditated attack.
Here's what we learned from court earlier this morning after that tense appearance, surrounded by dozens of deputies inside and outside the courtroom. We're learning more details from the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office about what's now being called a deliberate attack. Prosecutors say witnesses watched Hinton stop his car outside of graduation ceremonies for students at the University of Cincinnati, then ram the recently retired deputy who was outside his vehicle conducting traffic, ultimately ending his life. Now, the defense explained that this has been an emotionally charged week for Hinton after his son was killed by that Cincinnati police officer on Thursday.
So look, a good aspect of this particular story is the fact that Rodney Hinton Jr. was, of course, denied bail, despite the fact that his defense was trying to say, oh, he's just an innocent Baba Angel Aladdin. The court ended up siding with the multiple different witnesses that the prosecution identified, which showed that he actually slowed his vehicle down to a stop, aligned himself with this particular sheriff's deputy, and decided to run him down outside of a college graduation at the University of Cincinnati, which, by the way, seems like more akin to a terrorist attack than anything, and a lot of people who are in support of the deputy who was killed want the death penalty pursued for this particular suspect. And by the way, if you were going to pursue a death penalty case, this kind of act of premeditated homicide would seem like something that you would pursue it on, although I think that there is a chance that they're going to argue that this was kind of like a crazed state as a mitigating factor to maybe get this down to an aggravated manslaughter or maybe a potential lesser charge. But honestly, I would have to examine the Ohio Penal Code in order to make that determination. But again, based on what is accused and supported by multiple different witnesses, this appears to be one of the most obvious, unjustified revenge killings of an officer or a sheriff's deputy who wasn't even a part of the department that he was angry at, based on the fact that he had generalized anti-cop sentiment due to the fact that his son was shot by the police in what was likely a justified shooting.
Now, Giacomo, you mentioned that moment when he shouted out, but what was the overall mood in the courtroom during this hearing? We did see so many deputies that were there for it.
Tiffany, I've been to a lot of courtrooms for a lot of criminal cases over the last 15 years. I've never seen so many deputies show solidarity like that in the courtroom. The mood was solemn, and certainly the jabs by the defendant in this case as he was exiting the courtroom, the deputies just remained silent as he walked out.
Now, of course, when you go on social media, what you ultimately end up discovering is that there is a fair amount of support for Rodney Hinton Jr. However, since they're not identifying the sheriff's deputy, who presumably could be white in this particular circumstance, it doesn't appear that it's gaining the level of traction that other cases that were racially charged by people, by the way, looking at it from the outside, have gotten. This guy has nowhere near the money on the Give, Send, Go that I found, which, by the way, I won't link in the description of this video, that Carmelo Anthony has. He doesn't have anywhere near the money that Shiloh person has for calling a little black kid the N-word. So it appears, even though there is support for his actions, for his revenge killing, that support is muted in comparison to what we've seen in other related cases. And of course, I will point out that the support is just not backed up by any kind of logic or reason or sense, because this individual did not revenge kill the person who's even behind the shooting, whether you think it's justified or not. He ended up targeting a random person who was directing traffic, who happened to be in a law enforcement uniform, not even from the same department, and ran him down and murdered him. And people are celebrating this, and it's absolutely disgusting in every possible way. Rodney Hinton Jr. is a thug and a criminal. Rodney Hinton Jr. is somebody who tried to take the law into his own hands on behalf of his criminal son, who was also killed for his law-breaking action. Look, I know it might sound like I'm beating a dead horse, because I talked about this in reference to that traffic stop body cam that we covered in a previous video, but we are told by the left time and time again that every black person needs to have the talk with their kids, where they explain that police officers are evil, white, and racist, and they're just looking for a reason in order to kill innocent Baba Angel black people, and you just can't ever give them the chance. And that's how we know for sure that black people behave themselves incredibly well around law enforcement. Well, guess what? Ryan Hinton, I guess that talk didn't take because he decided to grab a firearm, run out of a stolen car, dropped the firearm when he fell, picked it up again despite the fact that the police were yelling commands, and he seemed absolutely shocked that he was shot for his trouble, even though in many of these cases, this is exactly the result that you would expect. This guy right here, Mr. Oh, I probably had the talk back in the day when I was a youth, and I definitely gave my kid the talk, decided to run down a police officer in his vehicle because in reality, these people do not respect law enforcement. These criminals, this is an intergenerational criminality right here, think that they are entitled to get away with whatever they want, and this guy decided to lash out in one of the dumbest, most vicious and disgusting ways against a law enforcement officer, so I do believe that this should be subject to the highest criminal charge. I don't give a damn about his grief, he just inflicted that grief upon another family based on the idea that he was mad, he was angry, he was upset because his son was acting wrong and ended up getting shot, and I have no respect for that, and I have no respect for his supporters, and I am hoping, beyond all hope, that this campaign doesn't gain any traction, but the fact is, when the police officer or the sheriff's deputy ultimately ends up being identified, if he turns out to be white, you might see people rally in a similar way that they rallied behind Carmelo Anthony, and by the way, one of the reasons why they'll rally is not because they believe either party is innocent, it's because they know that they're guilty, and they like the fact that Carmelo Anthony killed a white kid, they like the fact that this guy, allegedly, if it is to be proven in court, killed a police officer, and if it's a white police officer or white sheriff's deputy, that's a bonus for them. So yeah, this country absolutely in a terrible state in terms of race relations. I've commented on it, I've talked about it, but I want to know what you guys think about this down in the comments below. Now, as per usual, if you like this video, then show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the absolute craziness behind the support for this individual. Till next time.